This is the 5-minute sample for The Promise by Kai Brightly and Meg Bawden. This is my 21st audiobook, and it was released on April 21st, 2020. This title was a refreshing change of pace after doing a couple biker romances. It's a very personal and patient narrative, compared to the more bombastic and harried exploits of the bikers, which I assume is due in large part to Meg Bawden's authorial contributions. Isn't it amazing as a reader or listener how you can notice the subtle differences in style when a book that was written by multiple authors changes to include or substitute a different author? That was a mouthful. You'll notice affectations, descriptions, and dialogue that differs from the previous authors, and you may or may not like it. This is another wonder of fiction across differing forms of media. Different people can take over and write for the same character, and we, as audience members, are then able to observe and reflect upon their changes. In a strictly literary sense, this is definitely an easy thing to do when there's only one author heading a series, and then another author takes over, though that's pretty rare. For her part, Bawden lends a sensitivity to this spin-off of the Kings of Men series that doesn't make the main characters, Shane and West, any more or less relatable than the bikers, but it does provide warmth and insight into the lives of citizens who live in the same city as the motorcycle gang, with a different angle than those of the bikers themselves. This helps make the world the series takes place in feel more fleshed out and atmospheric, which I consider to never be a bad thing. A strong setting is the backbone of a strong narrative. With all that said, I hope you enjoy this 5-minute sample. Chapter 1. Shane Pegoraro. My head pounded, and the inside of my mouth tasted like an old sock. Or at least the way an old sock smelled. One that was buried at the bottom of a gym bag for about 3 weeks and had started to mold, too. I groaned and sat up, slowly, because my head spun and my stomach heaved. I sniffed and moaned, glancing down at myself. My eyelids felt crusty and strange. At some point last night, I'd worn a beer, and the stench was making my stomach unhappy. My white t-shirt was stained brown, and something that looked like red spray paint spotted my jeans. What the hell? These clothes weren't right, because it was winter. I was sure I'd left the house last night in a red V-neck sweater I'd kept from Carter's clothes yesterday, after West invited me into the room they had shared to sort through them. West, tall and with dark week-old scruff on his face, was handsome in a way I could barely stand to look at these days. He had a sharp chin and nose, but they worked for him, even if he looked serious most of the time. He was so full of life and vibrant, in jeans and a Bulls sweatshirt, and Carter was a husk in the hospital bed. We were at Walnut Creek Hospital to say goodbye to Carter, but he hadn't been able to say anything back to us for almost a month. The doctors were going to remove the machines keeping him alive. "It'll be okay. We'll get through this," Wes said, his rich voice quiet like we were in a library. His sharp eyes were a bluey brown that Carter insisted on calling violet, even though I'd never heard that was an eye color someone could have. I felt so cold and alone when Mom and Dad walked in. Dad wouldn't look me in the eye. Mom cried. They huddled together, and I wanted to go to Mom, but one look at Dad, and the red tint to his face as he stared down at Carter, kept me from going to her. The doctors filed into the room, and apology squinted their smiles and eyes. They took out the tube in Carter's throat. The nurse arranged his head on the pillow. He had on a knit hat to hide all the ugly bumps and scars from his many surgeries over the past year. His blonde hair hadn't grown back. He told me so many times he would beat this. He'd been lying. I couldn't cry. I couldn't feel anything. I was by myself now. West held Carter's hand while he dragged in some rattly breaths. A few minutes later, Carter seized on the bed and stopped breathing. West had been a mess while we went through Carter's things. I'd been a zombie, unthinking, unfeeling. While I shifted through Carter's nice suits and shirts in the closet, we'd both avoided looking each other in the eye and acted extra manly. But as soon as I was in my room down the hall, I'd sat with a pile of Carter's clothes in my arms and let the tears fall. He was only 30 years old. It wasn't Fair for him to be dead. Wasted away, stuck in the ground. Carter and West were my rocks. They'd let me move into their house 2 years ago, after I came out, and Dad had a huge problem with everything. He'd been mostly okay with Carter, but now that he had 2 gay sons, he wasn't handling it well. Mom couldn't calm him down. It was a nightmare. Carter and West had rescued me, and less than a year later, my brother came home with the bad news that the migraines he'd had his whole life were caused by tiny spreading tumors in his brain. But don't worry. The doctors say they can operate, and I'll be fine. Carter smiled while West stared at him with eyes so big, I worried they would pop right out of his head. My brother was not fine. He had 1 surgery, and then another, and then another, and then radiation. And then the doctors had said he was done for, and yesterday, holding a pile of his old clothes in my arms, that had just been the end for me. If he didn't need his sweaters and shirts and suits, and the fancy belts he wore into his office, then he was really dead. Last night I had cleaned myself up and put on my best clothes, pocketed my fake ID, and sneaked downtown to my favorite club, Blackout, to, well, black out. Apparently I'd managed to do it too. I was just happy to be on winter break at college right now, because there wasn't a chance in hell I could go to class this way. I was certain I'd meet my friend Teddy and a few others out last night. I glanced up and froze. Bars in front of me. They were solid, shiny steel. I cast my gaze around the room. Whitewashed cement block walls. I glanced down. Questionably clean white sheets on a paper-thin mattress and no pillow. Carefully I stood with my stomach still churning. The floor stayed still under my feet, so I shuffled to the bars and looked out. Why the f*** was I in a jail cell? Nearby, to my right, sat a wide wooden desk, and a cop slouched in a chair, his head bowed over a magazine. A link to purchase The Promise is in the description below. This title was a royalty share production, so I make 20% from any purchases. Thanks for listening.